Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Well, first, I'm Debbie Aller. I'm the Agricultural Stewardship Specialist with Cornell Cooperative Extension based in Suffolk County. So I'm out in Riverhead on the eastern end of Long Island. So if anyone on this call today has questions related to climate smart farming on Long Island, please do contact myself there. So our two speakers today, thank you both David and Matt for your willingness to speak this afternoon. So first, David Kay is the Senior Extension Associate in the Department of Global Development at Cornell University. And I will allow him to expand on further on what he does in some of his projects when he begins his talk. And our second presenter today is Matthew Johnson. He's the Planning Director with the Tug Hill Commission. And again, I'll let Matthew expand a little bit more on the efforts he's undertaking there. So thank you again both for presenting today, and welcome everyone.
Great. So just a few housekeeping items. We had to turn this into a webinar and not a meeting because so many people have joined, which is great. So we're going to ask you to use the chat to ask questions, and our other co-hosts
use the Q&A for the questions.
Okay, great. Use the Q&A. I want to introduce Jim O'Connell, also who helped us organize this from Ulster County. So Jim is going to be monitoring the Q&A. At the end, we're going to ask you, you can raise your hand icon and we'll try to allow you to speak if we have time, and we'll collect questions. We're going to post the recording and the presentations. Thank you, Matt, for letting us do that. And we also have our emails. So there may be a lot of follow-up questions, and we would love if you email us and we'll get get the expertise that you need. Just really briefly, I want to introduce our Climate Smart Farming program. If you haven't heard about it, the website is climatesmartfarming.org. Our extension team here is on the call today. So if you have questions, if you live in one of these regions, please do reach out to them. We have resources and management practices related to climate mitigation, renewable energy, and also adaptation. And then we have a number of climate smart farming tools that can be used by farmers. And with that, I'm gonna turn it over to David. You wanna cite?
Thank you, Allison. Yeah, thanks to everybody for taking time out of your day for this topic, and also to Allison and her team for inviting us. I'm going to start by sharing my screen, and I hope everybody could see that now. So as mentioned, I am a Senior Extension Associate in the Department of Global Development. I've been at Cornell for over 40 years. I came as a graduate student and got a degree in agricultural economics, as it was called at that time, now the Dyson School. And I worked in the predecessor to the Dyson School for probably 20 or so, 25 years, working a lot on natural resource and energy related topics. I then transferred to the Community and Regional Development Institute, which has just recently been absorbed along with the entire department, which was formerly Development Sociology, into this new Department of Global Development, which is, Allison has an affiliation there as well. So we're kind of in new organizational territory. But I would describe myself at this point as a general social scientist who has worked a lot with, especially with the land use planning community over the years. And occasionally I've gone in and out over the years on projects focusing on farming and agriculture, but especially from a land use perspective. So I'm going to talk about large scale solar installations. This is a subject I've been working on for several years with colleagues at Cornell. And this presentation is kind of intended, as Allison said, as what we hope will be the first in a series on related topics, both through the Climate Smart Farming program and in some other contexts as the Cornell faculty, on-campus faculty and extension system becoming increasingly organized about how to respond to this relatively new issue in our state. So let's see if I can move on. I'm going to just spend a couple minutes catching people up on policy, and I'm guessing that from a different perspective, Matt from Tug Hill will be also talking about some other aspects of this. The first thing I wanted to just remind you of, if you're a farmer, is that there's a whole different set of rules and considerations for on-farm solar. So what I mean by that is generating solar on your farm for use by the farm. And the rules have for that are available. You can see them. There's a particular interest in this net metering question, which I won't go into, but it essentially means, can you get credit from the utility for the electricity you generate? And the thing I would just want to point out here is that for renewables, there's some scales of how much you can do to qualify for this kind of credit from the utility. I'm not going to go into that. And I will mention, by the way, almost all of my slides have links, have URL links on them for people interested in more information that you could go and follow up with. If you get the slides, which we will make available, you can either contact Allison and that team and or me directly at dlk2@cornell.edu. The bigger deal in terms of new policy has been, as of the beginning of 2020 or the middle of 2020, there was some major new legislation passed, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Acts, or CLCPA, which really governs overall decarbonization of the New York economy, and the Accelerated Renewable Energy Growth and Community Benefit Act, which establishes rules, new rules, because there were existing rules, for siting electricity generating facilities of all types. But those rules are, in this context, are certainly relevant to solar, although not only solar. They're relevant to all kinds of generating stations. I'll also point out that there were, as you can see from the little bit that came up, there's a lot of other pre-existing policy that the state has in place that governs this kind of energy transition territory. So it's a complicated, in a way, like many of the things I'm going to say today, part of the bottom line is it's a complicated world that we're entering into. And I certainly, and probably nobody, is expert in all important elements of what we need to know in order to sort of move ahead over the next 20 to 30 to 40 years. I'm now gonna, so that was like, I give whole lectures on this, but on that stuff, but I'm skipping over most of what's there to focus in now on electricity generation and agriculture in particular. So one of the first things I like to do for people who haven't spent a lot of time thinking about this is just provide a little bit of context about numbers, because numbers are really important in thinking about this topic. And then I'm going to be focusing probably on more numbers than you want to see in this presentation. So translating numbers into metrics that make sense to you is important, and because people think about these in different ways. So most of the time I'm going to be talking about in terms of megawatts of solar photovoltaic capacity. That's essentially how much is a particular facility rated to generate at, if you will, at its maximum potential at any given point in time. So there's a lot of complications about these things, but one sort of crude translation is showing up there that like 1 megawatt of capacity of PV is roughly in New York, given sort of on average what's solar we have, it's roughly about 150 to 200 homes per megawatt can be supplied from that. There's a lot of complications about what that means. Here's the second metric, which I use and a lot of people use in this context as a land use person, which is each megawatt of generating capacity requires 5 to 7 or more acres with current technology of land to be with a facility. So that's a really important metric to remember if you're concerned about land issues. This is just a little summary of what exists and is known to be in the pipeline for what I, in my context, would call smaller scale PV generation, everywhere from household, commercial, kind of up to about 5 megawatts, which is what NYSERDA calls distributed solar, meaning that it's, it's intended to be, if you will, very close to where it's used and not have to travel across the big transmission lines that much. So certainly on-farm solar would be this type. So we currently have, lots and lots of this, as you can tell from, going around communities that have rooftop solar, and a total of about equal numbers, about 2 gigawatts or 2,000 megawatts are already installed cumulatively in New York, and about 2 gigawatts are known to be in the pipeline of these smaller scales. These are overwhelmingly small scale. So in this total I have here, I show you a very, very tiny percentage of this category of renewables are slightly bigger than what they call distributed solar, 5 to 10 megawatt range. Very, very small number of these projects statewide. So here's kind of the takeaway from this kind of category of solar. There's lots of distributed. In general, if you look at maps, which I didn't include in this presentation, if you see where there's population density, where a lot of people live, that's where you see this kind of solar. So there's a little over 4 gigawatts either here or on the way. Now comes what I think is one of the biggest questions, which as you'll see a lot of uncertainty related to, which is how much solar electric does the state need? So a couple of years ago, a more or less journalistic answer to that came out. That was accompanied with state policy. At the same time, the state policy was really being formulated. And the state policy said, the market's going to decide the mix. There are some mandates in policy about how much of different kinds of renewable energy, but the mix fundamentally is not predicted because it depends on the market. It's not mandated. So is it going to be wind, onshore, offshore? Is it going to be solar? Is it going to be other technologies? That's going to depend. We don't really know, which makes the kinds of projections I'm going to talk about now difficult to know, and there's big uncertainty about it. So the journalistic estimate that came out a few years ago was that we're going to need about 23 gigawatts of solar. This is based on sort of projecting how, more or less naively, from where things are now to where they might be down the road. Well, that means since we have 4 gigawatts already through the program I just talked about here on the way, that would be like maybe another close to 20 more that we might need. So let's put that in context. If you look at the screen that just came up, that shows you that 23 total gigawatts, that's roughly equivalent to the total 1-year addition of all generating capacity in 2019 for the United States. So just let that sink in for a minute about, we're talking about, that's across all types of generating capacity. So that number is a biggish number, is my conclusion. Okay, let's look now. Here's a chart from some work that was done by NYSERDA. And what they're showing here is the key thing to look at here is kind of that pale green area, because one of the key factors influencing location, which there are many factors, but one of them is proximity to transmission lines. of utility scale solar in particular. I'm talking about utility scale now. So, and what they did is an analysis trying to say, hey, where are there essentially parcels of land that are suitable and large enough for that to happen? And what you can see is kind of a little cluster in the southeastern Adirondack area, just outside the park, and the North Country outside the park, and basically along the corridor, which was originally defined by the Erie Canal, and is now the Thruway. So remember that the way that the factors that they took into account in figuring this out included excluding land in those categories you see right there, which includes an exclusion of forest and farmland, land and crops. So again, this is just like a first cut kind of analysis to get a look at probabilities about where it will go and where the land may be suitable to enable it to go there. It doesn't take into account anything really significant about what I would call the economics of it, other than some basic siting constraints. So here's another part of NYSERDA's analysis that shows you some supply curves in economist term, which are showing you, so I'm going to highlight two key things. This is for solar energy. And the two things to highlight here is what you should take away from this chart is around $60 to $70 per levelized cost, per megawatt of levelized cost. You see, it starts getting really expensive to do solar according to this analysis. Okay, and they have timelines here. You can see no matter what the time frame is, that's still true. What does that mean? It means if you look at some alternatives, so that's around $60 to $70. You see something similar in this next chart for wind, but it's a little bit higher, $80 to $100. And what you're seeing is that starts happening in both wind and solar around 2,000 megawatts or 2 gigawatts of capacity, according to this analysis. Now let's look at offshore wind and their analysis for offshore wind. What you see is a very different shaped curve, flat, with instead of around 2 gigawatts, they're talking about 12, 14, 16 if you're willing to pay the cost of 80 to 100 or higher dollars per megawatt. So one way of interpreting that is essentially there's economic limitations that are pretty low, around 2 gigawatts for solar, because there are alternatives that would be at a certain point become cheaper. Well, here's another study that was done for NYSERDA using different methodologies and different assumptions. This one is predicting, and by the way, this is from a draft report. I don't even know if the final report is out yet, but this is showing a lot more potential solar by 2050, by 2050, different time frame too. By 2050, they're predicting maybe we're going to need 36 gigawatts of upstate solar and almost 10 gigawatts or almost 50 gigawatts of solar in New York State, in different parts of the state. Time, okay, I should really hurry up. I'm going to talk now about what we know about projects that are already being planned. So that was speculative about the future. Now we're talking about what's already being planned, and I'm going to try and hurry. This chart shows two things. One is the number of projects which are in the queue to get linked to the grid. They're speculative. Many of these may not happen, but they're sort of at the point where they've announced publicly, the developer, they want to have a project. And what you see here is the number of projects and the total megawatts by size category of the proposed project. So what you're going to see here is a whole lot of 20 megawatt proposals, which is roughly, again, 100 acres in size, maybe more. However, most of the proposed capacity shown in the red line is coming from the very largest facilities. So that's something to remember. And then the other thing is, which a lot of people are going to be very interested in, is The 20 megawatts and smaller projects go through local government review for their permits. All the larger ones go through the state review process. So the state review process, I'll turn to quickly. Article 10 review is what it has been. It used to be 25 megawatts and above. And now through the new office, ORES, which is essentially, again, reviewing these larger facilities. There's 6 steps of review under the Article 10 process. I don't know that much about the current ORES process, which is still being developed and evolving. What this slide shows you is the number of projects at each stage of review. There are of solar projects. There are a small number that have been already completed and certified. I don't believe any of them have been built yet. Most of the projects in this queue of Article 10 review projects are still in the first step of review. And a few of them, I think there are 3 or 4, have now been transferred over into this new state ORES review process, with a few more to come. Here shows you the distribution geographically on top of the green, showing where ag districts in the state are. This shows you the distribution of where these 40 largest projects undergoing Article 10 review are located. So again, you can kind of see something that confirms to some degree, but not entirely, what you saw in that NYSERDA map I showed you earlier about where the transmission corridors are. Here's just a little bit of an example about one of those projects that one of our graduate students has spent some time looking into, to give you, again, a sense of scale. So this is in Livingston County, 640 square miles, town of Mount Morris, 50 square miles. It's a 175 megawatt proposal with some battery storage. As you can see from the map, the green again is related to agriculture, prime farmland, and prime farmland if drained. There's a lot of it in this town. There's 24 square miles within that sort of orange project boundary. However, the ultimate facility ultimately is going to require less than 2 square miles of that 24 square miles. So they've got a lot of land within which this project might be sited. And again, let's see, there's a little additional information about this particular proposal about how much ag land is within the boundary. Where it's sited within these boundaries obviously makes a huge difference.
Hey, David, 3 minutes.
Yeah. Thank you. So the bottom line, we did some analysis of all 40 of the proposed sites, given the boundaries, without accounting for where they're actually going to be sited. And what you're going to basically see in this slide and the next one is they're being sited on property that has the potential to impact a lot of farmland. This shows this in terms of land cover. The next one shows this in terms of prime soils. So, there's a potential for, within the boundaries of these sites, for it to be pretty significantly involving soils and farmland. Now, another kind of sense of scale issue. So if we look at those 40 projects, which we know something about already because they're in various stages of review, and only look at the 28 counties in which they've been proposed, so excluding the other counties, what you see is we estimated about 1 to 2% of the good farm soils would be impacted of those counties just by those projects. Well, obviously those projects are nowhere close to delivering the amount of solar we need. So how about thinking about, what if we needed 20 gigawatts of capacity, which is what that early projection said? Well, how much soil would be predicted impacted under those assumptions? This suggests it would be like 4 to 6% of soils in those counties if the state's entire supply were to come from those counties. What if we needed that 50 gigawatts? This would be, significantly more, obviously, significantly more. So then the question becomes is this a lot or a little given the trade-offs that we as a society need to make in various ways? And, there's no answer to that. Specifically, you're going to have your own answer to that. But, what's the baseline? Are we going to need 2 watts? Are we going to gigawatts? Are we going to need 50 gigawatts? I can't answer that for you. But, if you translate those numbers into acreage, 10,000 to 500,000 acres, that's a pretty big range. It's a little or a lot. Here's some context. We have about 7 million acres of land in farms. We have about 10 million acres or 9 million acres classified as ag land use, according to the American Farmland Trust, about 5 million of high quality ag land. That's a statewide comparison. AFT has also done some estimates about annual losses, mostly to development and other conversions. That's about 253,000 acres or 17,000 acres a year. So compare that to 10,000, 50,000. Those are permanent losses. It's debatable about whether land and solar is a permanent conversion or a temporary conversion, long-term temporary. If you look at it from a county perspective, that's another of many perspectives you can take to contextualize this. I'm just giving you the average per county ag census acres across the 57 non-New York City counties.
Hey, Dave, you're out of time.
Okay, I'm gonna steal a few more minutes, okay?
Okay, but it's 12:27 and there's a
Okay,
question for
just
you.
a couple more.
Okay,
Co-location. I'm just going to briefly highlight the fact that there's a lot of research going on right now and practice going on right now, looking at what else can you do that has agricultural implications alongside or underneath solar panels. These show some of the kinds of issues being taken into consideration, some of the types of experiments going on in small scale plots, and the questions being asked. I do want to draw attention to some of our colleagues, brand new, hot, not even actually out yet, but will be Monday, hot off the press, a new report about the potential for solar grazing in New York State. And I also finally want to mention that Allison and I are working on a brand new project looking at solar leasing in 3 states. And our goals are to develop New York State specific guidance for landowners and farmers about leasing issues, to do a profile of policy, and to do some analysis based on the data in leases about the equity, economic, and environmental implications of solar development in the state. But that project is just getting started. Our principal investigator from Maryland in this project gives this advice to people thinking about leasing their land. Most of this is use your common sense and also talk to an attorney. And when you get my slides, I'm just going to show you that there's a lot of information out there. If you get my slides, you should go read it if you're thinking about leasing your land. This is a New York State resource. There's a mitigation resource from Ag and Markets, another version of it. There's a Farm Bureau resource, a resource from the Solar Energy Industry Association, a resource from our colleagues in Ohio, and a great series of webinars, which are all recorded and available online from our colleagues at Penn State. And with that, I will close. So again, if you want a copy of this, which has all the links to all of these resources, you can email me at dlk2@cornell.edu.
great. Thank you so much. I think Matt's going to load his PowerPoint and there is a question, David, you can.
What's the question?
The
I
question
see lots of
is
stuff
from
in the chat.
Andrew, why not use more wind where the land around the towers can still be farmed. And Matt, can you load your PowerPoint?
Well, that's a good answer in a local, in a local consideration. That's if your priority certainly was making more farming available, and you didn't think there was much potential for this co-location option, which, as I say, is very early in the research about what is viable in terms of co-location and what's agriculture, that would be an alternative. And as I say, state policy about wind versus solar on land is pretty much, we're going to let the market decide. And of course, the market is structured depending on other rules and regulations that structure the market. So for now, though, it's kind of like wind versus solar is the market will decide given certain constraints on that. So
Great. So Matt's got his slides loaded. Thank you so much, Matthew. We'll turn it over to you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, and I can see your slides.
Okay, great. That's half the battle. So thanks to Allison and the Cornell folks for inviting us today. I'm trying to get my slides to advance. Not having much luck with that.
The arrow key on your keyboard.
Yes, that doesn't seem to work right now.
Try and click directly on the screen, Matt, and then mess around with the arrow keys or the space bar. Or at the bottom, there also should be a left and right arrow on the bottom left corner of the screen.
Okay, that seems to work.
Good.
Great. So thanks for having me, everybody. My name is Matt Johnson. I'm the planning director at the Tug Hill Commission. I've got a lot of slides for you today, so I'm probably going to run out of time, but I will make the slides available. And I'll show my email at the end of the presentation here. So if anybody, please feel free to email me with any questions you might have. But so I work for the Tug Hill Commission, and that's a very small state agency, and we're headquartered in Watertown. And we're kind of a non-regulatory consultant type agency that is charged with helping the 41 towns and 18 villages in what we call the Tug Hill region. And that's shown on the map on the screen there. We're east of Lake Ontario and west of the Adirondacks, and pretty much south of Watertown and north of the Syracuse and Utica metropolitan areas. And we operate on the philosophy that we don't want to tell our communities what to do in terms of land use or development. We very much believe in a bottom-up approach. We trust our local communities to be the best judge of what's best for their communities, and we don't interfere in local matters. So this is very important when it comes to these solar projects that we're seeing a lot of. We don't take an advocacy position. Yes, you should invite solar in. No, you shouldn't. You should prohibit all solar. We let the community make their best judgment, and then we do whatever we can do to make sure that they can implement their vision. So we're seeing a lot of large-scale solar projects being proposed in our area, and David showed a slide from NYSERDA that kind of bears that out. Most of these are being proposed and built on farmland, and we've kind of seeing three different size groups for these. We're seeing a 3 to 5 megawatt systems. We're seeing some 20-ish megawatt systems, and then we're seeing some very large, really large utility scale systems that are 120 or greater megawatts. And we're getting requests every day from towns and villages to help them with anything they can do to regulate these projects as far as land use regulations, zoning, site plan review, that type of thing. So we did some analysis in partnership with the Development of the North Country on where these systems might go. So we plugged a lot of different factors into our GIS system, and the map on the left of the screen is Jefferson County, and you see all the yellow areas. Those are what the GIS told us would be likely locations that would meet the criteria solar developers are looking for. So as you can see, there's a lot of yellow in Jefferson County. And the green parcels are projects that are either proposed or proposed, built, or in some stage of development and construction. So what can local governments do to mitigate these projects through a land use, legally through the New York State land use framework? There's three things that we recommend, and they are more land use moratoria, comprehensive plans, and zoning. So the first thing we recommend to a community that doesn't have anything in their laws, in their local laws, to mitigate development like this, we recommend that they adopt a land use moratoria. So that those are adopted as local laws through the local law process. And they prohibit development of certain defined uses for set periods of time. So the local law would define large scale solar and say that no applications will be accepted by the town or village for a period of time. And it's usually 6 months. That's a common one. So what we want to do is use these 6 months to amend the community's land use laws, their zoning laws, and if possible, to amend their comprehensive plan. So comprehensive plans are documents that towns and villages and cities adopt by resolution that sort of lay out their policies on everything from land use to community development to parks and recreation. It's just a policy statement and a blueprint for what the town feels is important, how it feels about growth. They include to-do lists for certain projects, but we really recommend that every town that's got a village that's got a comprehensive plan update theirs to address this relatively new land use, to put some kind of a policy statement that the town's welcoming solar, the town's not so sure about solar, the town wants solar, but only in certain areas, that type of thing. We really want to see a policy statement in the comprehensive plan. And comprehensive plans are also designed to be sort of to be the written background rationale for any zoning law that the community adopts. So the comprehensive plan is where the community states in plain English what they're trying to accomplish and implement in their zoning laws. So zoning in New York State is done by local government. There's no county zoning, there's no state zoning. It's up to every town, village, or city to adopt their own zoning law. And that's all spelled out in town, village, and city law. And it's something that at the Tug Hill Commission, we work with on a day-to-day basis, helping all of our communities update their zoning, write zoning for communities that don't have zoning. But the purpose of zoning is to protect the public health, safety, and welfare of the citizens of the community. And it does this by regulating three things: land use, density of development, and placement of structures on lots. And a good zoning law, it needs to be in sync with a comprehensive plan that I just mentioned. Your zoning shouldn't say implement something completely different than the vision of your comprehensive plan. It should be in accordance. It should implement a community vision and encourage orderly growth, and it should protect important resources. And agriculture is certainly one of these resources that we're trying to protect. So the large-scale solar developments are relatively new things. But there's a lot of model zoning language available to communities to use to be kind of a starting point with standards that they can plug into their existing laws. And sort of the granddaddy of these is the NYSERDA solar energy model, which is pictured on the screen. And that's a PDF that you can download on the NYSERDA website. So there are a lot of different models out there, but most of them sort of most of them have a lineage that goes back to the NYSERDA model. So most towns and villages, there's lots of help available to incorporate this language. You can get help from your county planning department, regional planning agencies like ours. Private consultants can help with this. But we really strongly urge municipalities to ask for help. Anything dealing with zoning and writing zoning laws is pretty complicated. And there's kind of an art to how to incorporate all of this new language. And so there's lots of people available to help. So please ask for help. So one of the things zoning can do is it can relegate certain land uses to different parts of a community. The name zoning, communities are typically divided into different zoning districts. This is a map of the village of Camden in Oneida County, and they have adopted zoning for large-scale solar, and they've limited it to that sort of orangey pink area on the western side of the village. That's where they see that's the appropriate place that they found for these developments to go. Another thing you can do with zoning is you can incorporate density standards. So you can have a minimum lot size for solar developments. And there's model guidance in that NYSERDA model zoning law for this. You can have different minimum lot sizes for different zones. You can have one minimum lot size community-wide. It's really up to the community. And going back to the comprehensive plan and trying to implement what the comprehensive plan's vision is. You can also have a standard that these developments can only take up a maximum percentage of the particular lot that they're being built on. Some communities say that these can't take up more than 50%. It's maybe 40 to 60% of the lot. That's all legal to do under the zoning framework. You can also implement dimensional standards. You can set a maximum height for the panels on these arrays. It's common to say that they can't be higher than 15 or 20 feet. You can incorporate setbacks. And the table you see here is, that comes right out of the new proposed Office of Renewable Energy Siting draft standards. So the state with that is kind of saying that it's appropriate to have a standard that the arrays have to be 100 feet from residential property lines, or maybe a minimum of maybe 200 feet from a non-participating neighboring occupied residence. You can implement or you can incorporate design standards. I'll just quickly run through these because I know we're very short on time, but you can say that all utility lines have to be undergrounded, access paths have to be non-paved, they've got to be impervious surfaces, solar panels can't have anti-reflective coatings, lighting should be minimized and downcast. The removal of trees larger than 6 inches in diameter should be minimized. So you're trying to prevent these projects from taking down a nice wood, clearing a nice wood lot or forest land. You can mandate a 7-foot high fence, and you can mandate certain types of screening and landscaping. And what I have at the bottom of the screen is the standard that's in the NYSERDA model. So that's, you can have a such and such a tree every such and such feet with shrubs in between. That's really sort of up to the community to tweak when they are amending their zoning to include these things. For ag resources, and this is where it, this is where it gets a little controversial, and people around the state have different opinions on this. But the NYSERDA zoning model does have some sort of restrictions on what ag soils can be developed on and what ag lands can be developed on. And they have sort of a suggested standards that the solar energy, large-scale solar systems development footprint shall not exceed 50% of the prime farmland or farmland of statewide importance on a particular parcel. They also have a suggested standard that 20% of the surface area of all the panels in a particular project be seeded with native perennial vegetation designed to attract pollinators. And there's also language that you can include that says that if it's unavoidable to build on prime farmland, then the construction must be done in a manner that falls within the requirements of New York State Ag and Markets. So Ag and Markets does have a document that you can find online that's it's kind of a best practices for construction of these projects in a way that minimizes disturbance to prime soils and prime ag lands. You can also ask for a visual assessment for projects large enough a certain size. You could say 10 acres, you could say 15 acres. Most of these, David mentioned, they're about 6 or 7 acres per megawatt. So most of these that we are seeing are at least 15 acres. So you can require the developer or ask the developer to provide some kind of a visual simulation of what these things are going to look like to neighboring properties or maybe from the street, from the road. You can require a decommissioning plan that the developer's got to state what's going to happen in 25 to 30 years when the project is no longer economically viable. How are they going to dismantle and remove all of the equipment and restore the property back to its original condition? And a lot of communities asked for some kind of financial security to make sure that that is done, the decommissioning is done in the case that the company goes bankrupt or ceases to exist, or something happens where the municipality needs to be able to tap into a funds to do the decommissioning and the restoration of the land. So the mechanism through which communities use the zoning law is most have planning boards. And the planning board will do what's called a site plan review of a potential project application. So the developer comes to the municipality with a site plan, and that shows the layout and the design of the proposed project. That shows neighboring uses, that shows where the arrays are going to go, where the fencing is going to go, where certain natural features like wetlands might be, or existing woodlots or hedgerows, what the landscaping is going to look like. That's basically they're required to show how this is all going to be designed and built. So typically it's a planning boards in towns and villages that undertake this review, and they're going to approve or disapprove the project. This is from some materials that were submitted for a site plan in the town of Leiden for one of these projects that's on the border of Lewis and Oneida counties near Boonville. So this is a typical site plan that shows the lay of the land. Typically they'll have maybe some more sheets that show topography, drainage, any type of information that the planning board's requiring to be able to make their best judgment on whether or not the design is a good one. And the planning board has the authority to make recommendations or approve with conditions. They might say, you need to move the arrays back 30 more feet than what you're showing, or, you know, we want you to save a little more of the woodland, the forested area on a parcel. We want you to move the access road 30 feet to the north, things like that. There's a back and forth between the planning board and the developer. There's also another, a little more stringent type of review that communities can use, and that's called special use permit review. And we highly recommend that all of our communities that are reviewing these, review them under special use permit review procedure. And what that does, it gives the planning board a little more, and again, this is usually done by a planning board, but it can also be done by a town board or a village board or a zoning board of appeals. Typically, it's the planning board that does this, and special use permit review gives them a little more authority to really look at the impact of a project like this on the neighboring properties. And it actually gives them the power to turn down or disapprove a project solely based on the fact that it's just not going to fit into the neighborhood where it's proposed. So if you get one of these projects that's proposed like right directly adjacent to a large housing subdivision or right on the edge of a village residential area, the planning board can say, sorry, that that just doesn't fit in on this parcel in this area, so you've got to come back to the drawing board with a different site, maybe.
Hi, Matt. Maybe just 1 or 2 more minutes because we have a lot of questions coming in and we want to make sure we are able to get
Yep,
to those.
I can zoom through the last here.
Awesome, thank you.
There's also seeker review, which is state environmental quality review that's required when boards undertake site plan review or special use permit review. We could do an entire webinar on that. But if a project has a lot of environmental impacts, that could lead to the requirement that the developer produce an environmental impact statement. There's some other levels of review that these projects typically undergo. County Planning Board review, New York State Ag and Markets review, and the Office of Renewable Energy siting review, which David touched on that in his last couple slides, but we'll just zoom right through these. So certain projects in New York State under zoning have to be reviewed by the county. So a lot of these large-scale solar projects fall into the category of being reviewed by the county. So the county gets to sort of make recommendations. And in some cases, we have seen counties say they're recommending disapproval sometimes on the basis of that prime farmland is being consumed or converted. And projects that are receiving subsidies from New York State, which it's probably all of them, if they're proposed in an ag district, that triggers a consultation with the New York State Department of Ag and Markets. So there'll be a back and forth between the developer and the other reviewing agencies in Ag and Markets on whether or not, what can be done to mitigate specifically prime development on prime agricultural soils and prime farmland. And then there's the state, what we're calling the 94C review, which are the really large projects, 25 megawatts or larger. 20 to 25 megawatts can opt into this. And this is a new program that's still being, the rules are still being promulgated and developed. We should know more in April. But for these large projects, the state kind of takes over and the state reviews and permits them, supposedly taking into consideration any local zoning or land use standards. But if the ORES, the siting entity, finds that those regulations are what they call unreasonably burdensome, they can opt not to apply them. And that's the ORES 94C, that's a whole webinar in itself. So to close up here, at the Tug Hill Commission, we do have an issue paper on this subject that the second edition of that is going to go on our website over the weekend. We've done a lot of work on that with a lot of partners in our neighboring counties and our IDAs, and again, the Development Authority of the North Country. And that paper includes our best up to the minute information on all the different aspects of what's involved in these projects. We've got a discussion of the issues. We've got some more model zoning information. We've got an example of a solar lease. And we've got an example of a decommissioning agreement and the discussion of how that all works. So thanks again. We really appreciate being a part of this. That's my email and my phone number, our website. Don't hesitate to give me an email or a call if you have any questions. And again, I can share these slides. So I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Matt. There's a lot of feedback somewhere.
That was kind of a whirlwind.
Yeah, obviously there's a lot of information out there, and we're nowhere near going to cover all of it in 45 minutes. And thank you, David, for the presentation beforehand. We do have a ton of questions coming in and only about 5 minutes left in this hour, unless we're going to continue a little bit after 1, Allison, which I guess we might be able to do if folks can stick around. But I'm just gonna get right into some of the questions we've received beforehand, and then we'll move on to a lot that are in the Q&A. And I know David's already begun to address many of these while you were talking, Matt. So one question, our 11 home neighborhood is faced with a 7,000 panel solar farm in our front yards. How can we preserve our prime farmland when the town just seems to be interested in the pilot monies to be generated?
You want to take that one, Matt?
How big was that?
7,000 panel.
Yeah, the best advice that I think I could give is to get involved with your municipality. Go to a planning board meeting, go to a town board meeting, attend. These developments are required to be reviewed with public hearings and accept public comment. So yeah, do everything you can to be part of that process.
And I would just quickly add, it's a political decision fundamentally about how different values are balanced. It depends on, as Matt just said, it depends on the values that predominate in your community and what the laws allow and don't allow. And at that scale, I don't think it's going to be this much state involvement and review. And I think it would be a local review. So I'm not sure about that.
How can you find out if your current transmission lines can handle a certain megawatt solar farm? Who would you contact for that?
I can take a stab, Matt. Do you want to?
I know there's doesn't NYSERDA have information on capacity? What I'll say is there's some information out there about that, but it's not very definitive. So like part of what happens if you're essentially there's some public information out there about that, but it's kind of contingent information about how much excess capacity exists on existing lines. But one of the things that needs to happen when a solar developer, particularly at utility scale, which is what we're mostly talking about here, when they propose a project, they have to spend a fair amount of money to satisfy the ISO, which is the independent system officer system that runs the grid. They have to essentially do a site-specific study to investigate that question, and it's not cheap. So
the bottom line is it's hard to get that information in a definitive way. It's possible to get some general information about it.
Debbie, can I just
Oh,
jump in real quick? And I think, Matt, are you able to stay a few more minutes?
I am, yes.
David, are you?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so we'll just stay on. If you want to ask your question, we can stay on for probably 10 more minutes. I do want to say, and Debbie will help us go through those questions. I do want to let you know that these are our emails. Our website will post the presentation today and the recording. And also we have 2 more webinars coming up the next 2 Fridays. Next week, we're going to be helping farmers learn to use the Climate Smart Farming Degree Day calculator for cropping decisions. And then the next week is going to be a similar webinar on how to use the Climate Smart Water Deficit Calculator. So now we'll get back to questions, and thank you everyone for being here.
great. Okay, the next question, is New York State considering any plan to use industrial sites rather than farms for solar installations?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. There's a priority in the new siting law to have the state actually get involved as a developer focusing on those kinds of sites. The question I have, which I don't know the answer to, is at what scale is this going to happen, and how much of that land on those kinds of sites is actually feasible to develop in relation to the wide range of total projections for how much electric energy we're actually going to need in the future. So, and I think I also put in the chat that there are several regional analyses that have been done. I forget whether, Matt, you guys have done any in Tug Hill about this specific question, but certainly in Long Island and the Hudson River Valley, there have been some regional analyses that have been done that are moving towards that question, because everybody agrees, I think, across the board, that if those sites could be developed as the highest priority, that would be a good thing.
Yeah, I'll add, that's something we talk about doing in our office. We haven't done yet, but certainly we encourage municipalities to be proactive in trying to find the best, sort of finding and promoting the best sites for these, which are, disturbed areas, land adjacent to landfills, quarries, any type of brownfield. And there are incentives in the seeker process that make it a little easier to develop those areas. But hopefully in the near future, we will try to develop a little work in the area of identifying these sites.
I will just add to that. I think it's a very high priority to do this, and I'm glad the state is starting to look at it. And local government should be starting to look at that as well, about what are the optimal sites within their communities for development. But I would be very, very skeptical of the plausibility of siting all of the solar on those kinds of sites, all of the solar that's projected to be needed. I just don't think there are enough of those sites in the state to accommodate the direction we're planning on going as a state. So.
Yeah, and some attendees are putting in some further information in the chat regarding some of your comments, maybe taking a different perspective on it or with some additional information. So hopefully folks can see the chat and read those comments as well.
Matthew, would you post your website address in the Q&A?
In the Q&A, I'll try.
And also, or
in the chat, feature.
Okay, I'll try the chat. It's www.tughill.org.
And the newly updated resource is going to be posted this weekend?
Yes, either close of business today or by Monday. I think we have staff putting the final touches on it right now.
Such a great resource.
By the way, everybody should also remember that SECRA only is not applicable to proposals for facilities larger than 20 to 25 megawatts. It's the ORES rules, which are similar to SECRA, but they're still under development. So there's a lot of reference to SECRA. That is what governs, along with local law, what governs your municipal review for 20 megawatt or smaller sites.
Mhm.
Great. So there's no possible way we're going to get to all these questions. So we will do our best to follow up with attendees after the fact. And David and Matt have both shared their contact information. So please do reach out to them if we do not get to your question right now. Next question. In Orange County, setbacks have been found to be an underutilized use of land. As long as buffering screening with conifers, are these setbacks and fences necessary?
I think that's a case by case, it depends. It's a case by case basis. And planning boards and municipalities really need to be somewhat flexible. You don't want to create the unintended consequence of having a really large setback that might push a solar development onto the better soils of a lot. In some cases, we have a lot of projects that are built on sort of old abandoned farmland that have nice hedgerows, rows of trees that really do a great job of screening the arrays. So in situations like where you've got a hedgerow that's going to block the view, you could have the arrays 10 feet from the property line. So you really want to be flexible. And that's where that site plan review process comes into play. The planning board's got to be really, really good at sort of reading the site plan and visiting the parcel, doing a site visit, and doing their best to be sort of take a innovative approach and having a flexible approach.
Matt, could you just add, for a lot of our planning boards around the state, which I've worked with extensively, are, they don't have experience reviewing solar. So like, what are they supposed to do? Like in the Tug Hill, what would you recommend that somebody who's trying to learn about this do?
Absolutely contact your county planning department, contact your regional planning agency. If you're in the Tug Hill region, contact us and we would be very happy to look over a proposed site plan. But yeah, there's lots of help out there. I don't want to commit county planning departments to work on my behalf, but typically a lot of the professional planners would be happy to give some advice on the site plan.
You might also add that projects of in certain location scale are required. They're reviewed by the local government, but under 239 L&M review, they're required to be referred to the county planning department. Not all of them, but a number of different ones for advice and a certain kind of weak sort of, it's a great, the way I put it, it's a great opportunity for those kinds of projects to get county input into the site plan, for example.
Are
Absolutely.
solar arrays considered impermeable surfaces, and are there stormwater considerations for implementations?
Yeah, I can answer that. Yes, they are impermeable surfaces, not located on the ground the way pavement is. They're at a height, and I'm aware of one or two papers so far from an academic perspective that have tried to look at sort of the implications of what this means. And the other thing I would just point out is like an impermeable surface, it drains generally onto permeable surfaces, but the slope, the soil type, there are a lot of factors that are going to influence the drainage questions around those, and including the scale. And at least from an academic perspective, there's very, very little research that sort of says what this impermeability means in different kinds of landscapes.
Yeah, and I would just add that your zoning law, your site plan review procedure should have requirements that the site plan has to meet certain standards of runoff onto neighboring properties and have some type of stormwater analysis. That's usually typically part of the requirements of site plan and zoning in the zoning language.
I would also say, I mean, this is fundamentally a construction project of a certain kind. You know, this is not like rocket science figuring out the drainage, issues and erosion potential kinds of things. So, there are a lot of tools out there that can give you a pretty good sense, even though I'm saying that the research isn't really in yet about exactly what's going on.
Okay, so
Yeah.
maybe another comment. Go ahead, Matt.
I'm just saying that, yeah, we're struggling to keep up with, this is such a new thing that we're just struggling to keep up with all of the different pieces of this and how they all work and the potential impacts. So we're doing our best to sort of stay on top of this, and we're learning more every month.
So maybe one more question for now, unless we can keep going. This is thinking ahead, and probably something others are thinking about as well. What happens to these panels or solar farms in 20 years when they are no longer being used, or maybe technologies have changed?
That's a great
Has
question.
research or anything been done around kind of the long-term impacts as these things are phased out, or not producing power anymore? What's going to happen to them?
Go ahead, Matt, and then if there's the last question, I'll add something to it.
Yeah, I do not have a great answer for that. That's definitely not my area of expertise. And that's why it's so critical for communities to build in language on decommissioning and the financial surety. Hopefully, there are people working right now, scientists working on how to figure out recycling of the materials and the structures that are involved in this, so that these can be reused. I've heard of plans for taking less effective older panels, moving them to less developed countries, using them there. I've heard lots of different things, but I don't have a great answer for what will happen in 30 years.
So I would remind people that 30 years ago, this year, the internet went public for the first time. So imagine predicting 30 years ago what the world would be like today. And I'm going to put that in the context as if you hear somebody say they know for sure what's going to be happening around this particular topic, they have a level of certainty that I would never, ever claim about that. And I'll point out that there's technical questions that we don't know the answer to about things like recycling. There are economic questions we don't know the answer to about what competing forms of energy and what their costs will be like. And there's policy and political questions about these things that we don't know the answers to about, what the values will be of society 30 years now as they look at the situation they face in those timelines. And just one other thing I would say, it's unfortunate we have to make policy now about things that we don't know the answers to. And certainly, as Matt said, like putting in contingencies, particularly for decommissioning costs and who's responsible for it, is essential for municipalities and for landowners to think about, and for the developers to think about right now. But like whether or not the sort of economic life of these facilities will be How long that's going to be, like, we don't really know. And also remember that the operational costs of these facilities is pretty low. Most of the money that goes into them up front. So even if there's cheaper facility, new technologies, it's feasible, in my mind at least, that keeping an operation that has very low year-to-year costs going, even if you'd never build it, with that technology at that point in time, it still may be feasible to produce energy from these things for a longer time period than people are projecting. And finally, the leasing, there's some uncertainty also, about this too, in terms of like the length of leases and so on. But I don't know what you're seeing, Matt, but like 15 to 30-year leases, somewhere in the middle of that is kind of what I'm hearing is typical. 20-year leases often. Other people, this is part of the research we're starting to do about those kinds of things.
Excellent. Well, there were lots of unanswered questions, but I think we could keep talking and answering questions on this topic. And it's certainly something we need to continue the conversation around. So lots of great discussion. And we would just like to thank you, David and Matt, again, for your presentations today. And I want to highlight the next 2 Fridays upcoming workshops by webinars by the Climate Smart Farming team. The information's up there for you to see. And all the information from today, the presentations will be shared and the recording on the climatesmartfarming.org website. And we will do our best to follow up with attendees who require certificates of attendance, as well as with questions that were unanswered today. So thank you very much for everyone attending this afternoon, and have a wonderful weekend.
Deborah, could I just make one more comment, which is like, there are a lot of resources already out there on the web. I would particularly recommend, and we're gonna, as Allison said, we're already beginning to organize some follow-up webinars to this one on this theme, generally speaking. But right now, if you go to Penn State, and I have a link to this in my presentation, but you can also email me. Penn State has been doing an excellent series of webinars about solar energy topics. And not everything applies to New York, but a lot of it does. So I could send you there and you could watch the recorded webinars there. And it's an ongoing series as well, so.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Matthew and David. Thank you, Deb and Jim, for helping us organize. And we'll see you soon.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Hey, Jim.
Yeah, hang on, let me stop the recording.